Hello and welcome everyone to today's virtual program, Bake Along at Home. Amy DuVall, owner of From Politics to Pastry, joins us for Hispanic Heritage Month as she teaches us how to make Tres Leches Cake. Amy, I'm going to pass it over to you. Audience, you should be able to see two views of Amy, her kitchen cam and her face. If for whatever reason you can't see two views of Amy, please let me know in the chat box and I'll do my magic on my side. I'm going to stop my video so that you just have two big boxes of Amy. All right, Amy, take it away.
Hi, everybody. Happy Sunday. Happy Hispanic Heritage Month. I'm Amy DuVall. I own From Politics to Pastry in Alexandria, Virginia. I owe you all a huge apology. If you're watching this recording, you have no idea that we started 15 minutes late. I can only tell you that for the last half hour, my husband and I have been running around like chickens with our heads cut off, trying to figure out why one of our cameras was not connecting properly. And then we had 3 camera stands break on us, and here we are. So we can only knock on wood that we've gotten all of our technical difficulties out of the way for the day. Hopefully my oven, your oven, everybody's mixers, everything will be okay from here on out. So yes, as Hannah mentioned, you should see 2 pictures of me. The one I'm talking into right now, which I'm waving into. Hopefully you can see me. Okay, I'll get closer so you can see me. And then the countertop camera, which I will bend over and look into right now and wave. So you've got 2 views. If at any point during this class you can't see me at all, see what you want to see while we're making the recipe, or hear me, because I've got my AirPods in, and hopefully they won't die on us in this class. Although the good news is I have a backup pair, so we'll deal with that if we need to later. But if at any point you can't see or hear me, feel free to let me know. Put it in the chat. Hannah will let me know. I know that you can't necessarily speak up since this is a webinar verbally for me to hear you, but yes, please put it in the chat and Hannah will pass it along if there's another view that you want to see. Same goes with questions. This is not a lecture where I need you to save your questions until the end. That would be kind of pointless with baking, because if you have a question on step 1 and 2 hours later, I let you ask it, that would be very helpful. So if at any point you have a question or a comment, feel free to put it in the chat. Hannah will let me know and I'll answer it in real time. Let me ask you all a question and put your answer in the chat. And you should, if you're all here, you've gotten the Zoom link and you should have gotten the recipe as well. I know Hannah sent those out this past week. Thank you for being here, first of all. Again, happy Latin Heritage Month, Hispanic Heritage Month. And thank you to the Alexandria Library for having me. I really appreciate it. I always have fun doing these classes, despite the crazy build-up today to getting this one off the ground and running. So let me ask you, if you've looked at the recipe, are there any questions out there about ingredients or tools that you might need for this class? I will very quickly just look at the recipe list. Again, I've got all my recipes here, but just in case, I'll kill a little bit of time here for you guys to type your questions in. And the ingredients are pretty straightforward, quite frankly. It's all-purpose flour. It's not nut flour. I get that question a lot about recipes. If all-purpose flour, which is a wheat-based flour, is interchangeable with a nut flour, the answer is no. If you have a gluten allergy and can't use all-purpose flour, I'd highly recommend something like a Bob's Red Mill, who doesn't pay me. I'm not a sponsor of them, but they have a product that's a 1-for-1 swap out between a gluten-free flour and an all-purpose flour. Baking powder, pretty straightforward. We want to use unsalted butter, not salted. If you only have salted butter, unfortunately, we aren't adding additional salt in this recipe, so you can't really take it out. But just know that your cake might just have a little more salty flavor. If that's all you've got on hand, it's not going to ruin that amount of butter that we have today, which is 1 stick, is not going to ruin the cake from a chemistry standpoint if you have to use salted. It's just going to taste saltier. But if you were in a recipe where there was extra salt being added into the recipe, you could substitute salted butter. for unsalted butter and just take out some of the added salt that you're adding. That's a helpful hint for the future. 5 large eggs. If you haven't gotten them out of your fridge yet, take them out now because we want them to be at room temperature. They mix in better and kind of join the party of the cake batter better if they're at room temperature, if everything's at room temperature, including your butter. So if you haven't taken your stick of butter out of the fridge yet, go ahead and do that now. So stick and eggs at room temp, or butter, stick of butter and eggs at room temp. Vanilla extract, whole milk for the Tres Leches. Let me say that it's called Tres Leches, but the truth is, as you've seen in the recipe, it's really cuatro leches. There's really 4 milks, right? So whole milk is one of them. Today, just so you guys know, if you are looking very closely at the details later, I'm going to be using oat milk because that's what I happen to have. I'm personally lactose intolerant. This dish is not for those who are lactose intolerant. There's a lot of dairy going on in this cake, but it's so delicious. But so I tried to thin it up a little bit as far as dairy by using oat milk. You could use oat milk or coconut milk are the highest fat content of the milk alternatives. So if you are lactose intolerant, I would highly encourage you to substitute the whole milk, not with skim milk, which doesn't have a lot of fat in it, or almond milk, but with oat milk or coconut milk. Coconut milk is going to give you a coconut flavor, which quite frankly is delicious. If I had that right now, I would use it, but that's just something to keep in mind. For the whipped cream, there we're going to be using heavy whipping cream. If you and we are using that because the extreme fat content of heavy whipping cream is literally what allows it to whip when we add air to it with our I'm going to use a handheld mixer, but we can use the stand mixer or your hand as well. If you don't want to, if you are lactose intolerant, or you're trying to just eliminate some of the dairy from this recipe, again, the higher fat content milk substitute you can use, the better. So Amy, if you aren't going to, yeah.
2% milk. Anne wants to know, is she shooting herself in the foot by using 2%?
For the cake, no. Actually, that's for the filling. You aren't shooting yourself in the foot. And if it's what you have, the truth is that we're adding sweetened condensed milk and evaporated milk as well, which are very high fat content too. So it's, from a chemistry standpoint, it'll turn out fine. It's just if you were going to do 2% milk and somehow eliminate the evaporated and the sweetened condensed, then you might have a problem because you literally will have no fat going on there. But if you are just using it to replace the whole milk in the recipe today, you'll be fine. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, you bet. Okay, so heavy whipping cream, white granulated sugar, and then our vanilla extract again. Quick just review on sweetened condensed milk. Comes in a can. We want to use, this is a 14-ounce can of sweetened condensed milk, and then a 12-ounce can of evaporated milk. This just happened to the brands that I have today. Certainly don't need to be using these brands if you don't have them. Any brands will work. So our 4 leches, we have evaporated milk, sweetened condensed milk, whole milk or some other substitute, and then heavy whipping cream for the topping. If you don't want to do the topping, if you don't want to do the whipped cream on the top, you don't have to. So that's where it would just be Tres Leches. I just find that the Tres Leches I've had that I enjoy the most has heavy whipping cream, whipped cream on the top. Do you have a preference? Sorry, I just saw a question.
Yes, let me read it out loud for you. Okay. Do you have a preference when it comes to vanilla extract? My COVID hobby has been making my own. So I have 6 types, and some is double fold versus single fold. I usually measure with heart.
Wow. I may need to be buying some of your vanilla extract. That is impressive. You're probably not going to like my answer. I'm probably going to offend you with my answer. When I first started baking professionally, I felt strongly that I would buy only the finest vanilla, pure vanilla extract, and, vanilla bean paste I use in a handful of recipes. But I'm going to be completely honest. I spent some time in a professional bakery in downtown DC, and maybe this isn't something you all want to know, but the vast majority of professional bakeries use imitation vanilla. I know you guys are probably cringing. The truth is that vanilla, I know, want, want. That's exactly right. It's very expensive. And baked goods don't sell for a ton of money, right? So, and from a flavor standpoint, if you're only using a teaspoon or a tablespoon, we're not talking large quantities. So most people, I will say, I'm sorry to break that news to you guys, use imitation vanilla. So you're gonna cringe. This is what I have today. I'm so sorry to tell you that. Now that said, I do have true real vanilla bean paste that I will use in some recipes where it's a much more concentrated vanilla flavor. And where I also want the specks, like the brown specks of the vanilla bean to show through. That's your other option too, of course, is that you can use a real vanilla bean. And I do that in some recipes. But in the Tres Leches cake, where it's quite frankly more about just a milk taste, that's what I use when vanilla is not the star. So there you go. So knock yourself out with whichever of the 6 varieties you want to use today. I'm impressed. That's awesome. Okay, any questions on tools? Highly recommend a stand mixer for the cake batter itself. For mixing the filling, we can just do that by hand. And then for making the whipped cream, if you are used to making whipped cream at home, you can do it in whatever way you're used to. You can use a lot of brute force with your arm, get your arm workout for the day. You can use a stand mixer. I will just give you the warning that if you've never used your stand mixer for whipping whipped cream, one of the things to keep an eye on is that depending on how large your stand mixer is, so I have a professional, so it's larger than the typical KitchenAid stand mixer. I find that the whisk attachment does not get to the bottom of the bowl completely. And so it actually doesn't do the greatest job whipping whipped cream. I have a special half-size bowl that I use when I make whipped cream exactly for that problem. So I tend to use my hand mixer, which is what you'll see here, because I know I can get it right to the bottom of the bowl. So it's just something to keep in mind you want to play around with. But I've had students in the past who are like, I get so frustrated. I stand at my stand mixer for 10 minutes trying to get my whipping cream to whip up, and it just doesn't do it. And that's why, because they have a bigger bowl, and the whisk it's not meant to do that. It's a large volume bowl, but you're putting a small amount of whipping cream into the mixer itself, and that's where the problem comes up. All right, so let me just see. Any questions, Hannah, on tools? I'll set this to the side over here.
I don't see any questions on tools, but just to clarify, if somebody does not own a stand mixer, they're still good.
They can still do it by hand. It's just going to take some elbow grease. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah. Yep. The recipe is written. Of course, now where my stand is, I now need to get an ingredient out of the cabinet. Okay, give me one quick second. You guys are going to see the phone do something weird here.
While Amy does that, I'll just take a moment to remind you all that if you have a question for Amy, feel free to put it in the chat box or Q&A box at any time, and I'll ask it so that everyone can hear the question. And I understand you're going to be working with your hands, and you're like, how do I type and ask a question and work on my hand, work with my hands at the same time? If we have to go back a couple steps, that's okay. You just, when you have a moment to ask your question, we'll go back.
Yep, not a problem at all. And I realize too, I mean, you guys are all baking at a slightly different rate than me and than each other. So it's not a problem. If you have a question on step 2 and we're on step 5, it's totally fine. Which makes me think, actually, Hannah, so you all have the recipe. I've learned over the years here, some folks love to follow along with the recipe. Some folks ignore the recipe and just listen to me. Some folks go back and look at the recipe later. Some people take notes. Any of those options are fine. I will try to give you some verbal notifications to where we are on the recipe. So right now we actually have not even, we're just about to hit step 1. I'll try to let you know. So if you're following along, you'll know where we are. Okay, I think that's everything. So let's get started. All right, so I already mentioned, make sure you have your eggs and your butter sitting at room temp right now. We want to get them, the reason you do that is obviously you don't want them to sit at room temp for a week, but we want to have them be more at the ambient temperature when we go to mix everything together. The best way I can explain to you why that's helpful is that if you have one temperature in a bowl of ingredients and another, it's more shocking temperature of something you're adding in, they don't blend right away because there are two temperatures and two different temperatures are trying to come together. So you can help that that issue of trying to, what's the word I'm looking for, of the ingredients trying to meld together by having them at the same temperature to begin with. It just makes a smoother process and a smoother product, quite frankly, without as much elbow grease, especially if you're doing this by hand. If your eggs were very cold and you dropped them into some other warm liquids, if they're too warm, first of all, they're going to cook. But if it's just room temperature and the eggs are cold, you're going to have to beat them that much longer to get that temperature down so everything mixes well together. So hopefully that's a helpful tip. All right, so we've got our eggs and our butter coming to room temperature now. Please make sure that you set your oven for 350. We want to preheat that so when we put the cake batter into the oven, it's already at 350 and can start doing its magic as soon as it hits the oven. So 350 Fahrenheit, go ahead and set that now if you haven't already. We are going to use a 9x13 pan, which a lot of people just see as a brownie pan or a lasagna pan. Some people too think of it that way. If you don't have a 9x13 pan, can you use an 8x8 pan? Yes, of course you can. Just recognize that your cake is going to be taller because we're going to have the same amount of batter, and instead of being spread out horizontally, it's going to be spread vertically. So it will likely bake. In fact, it will bake in a different time frame. So it's probably going to take longer the thicker it is. And you're just going to want to check it as we go. And don't presume that yours will be done when mine is. For the same reason, everybody's 350 on their temperature on their oven is not necessarily, believe it or not, 350 on my oven is not necessarily going to be 350 on your oven. Mine might be 352, yours might be 348. So when we get to that point, that's why I'm going to show you what you're going to look for to know that your cake is done. And we'll accomplish that when we get to that step. All right, so step one, preheat oven to 350. We are going to spray or grease our pan. That was the ingredient I need to get out from my cupboard. I'm just using a spray oil here. If you are using straight up oil, the easiest application is to put some on a paper towel and just wipe it like you're cleaning a window. You can do that. And then we are actually going to flour it as well. When I use my spray, I often do it over the sink because you're spraying it on the pan, but of course it's an aerosol. It goes lots of other places. By the way, helpful hint here, just while you guys are spraying, do not use aerosol oil sprays on your, if you have silicone fiberglass non-stick sheet tray liners, like a Silpat for your cookie trays, don't spray non-stick spray on those. A lot of people don't know that. The aerosols, the aerosol agents in these actually interact with the silicone fiberglass and will make your Silpats, you will go from non-stick to sticky. You'll see a residue build up and they will completely fall apart ultimately. So just a helpful hint on that. Okay, so we've got our greased pan and now we are going to lightly dust it with some flour, that all-purpose flour. So to do that, we're just gonna take a little bit of flour, and I do mean little, just a little bit, guys. And the best thing to do is over a garbage can or your sink. You're just going to kind of pat it so it lightly sticks to the spray oil that you put in here already. I'm probably going to add a little more here. We are not looking for the surface to be completely covered with the flour. We're just looking, essentially we've got a double duty way of making, well, in this case, I've got a triple way because my pan itself is nonstick. Now I've sprayed some oil on it, and now I'm going to add some more texture with the flour. So the idea is that the cake can't possibly stick to this pan, right? because it's got 3 barriers. Okay, so that's what we're looking for. Just a light flouring. Don't want it to be covered completely. And again, I like to do it over the sink because everything's not going to stick and some of it'll fall out. It's just easier to clean up from your sink, or you don't have to clean up at all if you do it over your garbage can. All right, so wipe off any excess flour. All right, so let's get this cake started. You can set your pan to the side. Move my stuff around here, guys. All right, so now we need the stand mixer. Actually, so that's step 1. Now step 2, we're going to, by the way, I personally find that about 3 bowls is useful for this class. I've got them stacked on top of each other. We've got 1 for mixing our dry ingredients for the cake, another 1 for stirring our filling, and a 3rd for whipping the whipped cream. Save the largest bowl, believe it or not, for the thing that we're going to have the smallest amount of, which is the whipped cream. That's simply because when you go to whip the cream, it's going to start flying everywhere. So if you have a small bowl, it's not going to hold a lot of the flyaways. If you have a larger bowl, it's going to make your cleanup easier. Okay, so I'm grabbing my smallest bowl. Set these over here. And per step 2, we're going to combine our 1.5 cups all-purpose flour into the same bowl as the baking powder.
Now, Amy, are you measuring by volume or by weight, or does it even matter?
In this recipe, I've written it to be, I guess this would be volume. So 1 cup, you can see here, 1 cup of flour. You will see recipes that are in weight. And quite frankly, when I am making larger quantities of things for my business, I do it by weight because it's the most accurate way of measuring things. Believe it or not, this 1 cup of flour that I just measured, even though I measure it in the same way every time, so I put it into my canister and then I do a straight edge of a knife right across it. If I weighed this right now, this could potentially weigh a couple of grams different than if I did it 5 minutes from now. And certainly tomorrow it could weigh something different. Everything from the moisture in the air to just, air pockets in your flour is slightly going to change the weight. For this recipe, because it's 1 cake, it's not like huge quantities of things, measuring it by volume is perfectly fine. So that's why you often see things in grams in some cookbooks. That's the way that most professional chefs are used to doing it for large quantities. If you have, a simple kitchen scale like this, you can get them online or at Target or Walmart, for under $20 these days. That will help you a ton if you decide to do things by weight. But in this recipe, we're doing it by volume. So we've got 1 cup and then 1/2 cup of flour. Yeah, so the way I do it when I just do it by volume, if you guys can see, I scoop into my canister and then I'm using the flat edge, the back part of the knife, to just even it out. We are going to whisk this with our baking powder just to combine and also to break up any potential clumps that might have formed in the flour, more likely the flour than the baking powder. All right, so then the baking powder, we've got a teaspoon. So this cake, it's essentially just a yellow cake. I mean, that's what we're making, is a yellow sheet cake, really, for lack of better explanation, with vanilla. In my case, imitation vanilla, but in other folks' cases, true made at home vanilla. I'm still amazed by that. That's awesome. All right, so 1 teaspoon baking powder with 1.5 cups flour, and then we're going to whisk that. I purposely didn't say in the recipe how long, because what you're looking for is obviously to combine the baking powder and flour, which they're the same color, so you aren't really going to be able to see them combined per se, but just to make sure that you have no obvious gigantic clumps of flour. And actually, the last few bags of flour I've bought have been more clumpy than usual. That's an official baking term, clumpy. So I've been having to whisk things a little bit more. If you really wanted to, get your anxieties out in the kitchen, get your frustrations out and want to use a sifter, you could, but it's not necessary for this cake, unless you have, some really crazy clumps that you can't get out with the whisk. Your whisk is doing the same thing as the sifter would. Okay. And then we can set our dry ingredients to the side. I'm going to sit here. All right, so for those of you following along, that's step 2. Now we're going to use our stand mixer or hand mixer. If you're doing this by hand, literally, like not with a hand mixer, you're going to have to put in some good brute force here, and things will be made easier for you the softer you let your butter get. In all of these ways, it's going to be easier the softer the butter is, but especially if you're doing it by hand, let your butter sit out for at least a couple of hours, quite frankly. Otherwise, your arm's going to fall off. Pretty much is what's going to happen. Okay, so we've got half a cup of unsalted butter softened, which is usually in the US, the way you buy your flour, that usually equates to 1 stick, but make sure you check the label on your butter. My butter is still actually colder than I would normally do it, even though I've had it sitting out for a while, but it will ultimately get there. The only thing that happens if it's not quite warm enough at this point is we're just going to have to mix it a little longer to break it down. So we've got half a cup of unsalted butter. To that, we are going to add 1 cup of granulated sugar, which is just plain old white sugar, a fancy word for white table sugar, if you will. And we're going to add that to the mixing bowl. By the way, you're using a stand mixer. We're using the paddle attachment, which looks like this, not the whisk and not the dough hook, which is the other 2 attachments that most stand mixers come with these days. You really only should be using the dough hook to replicate kneading. If kneading dough by hand, if instead of doing it by hand, you want to do it with a machine, or you want to start it with a machine and finish it with your hands, that's what you use the dough hook for. The dough hook doesn't really mix things per se, right? It would not mix what we need it to do right now. It would not do that. And the whisk, while it does mix some things together, its real purpose is to fluff things up with air. It's mixing air into your ingredients as opposed to mixing the ingredients themselves. So there's some small differences there, but quite frankly, the whisk is also difficult. With a solid mixture, you're going to get stuff stuck in it. So definitely use the paddle. Yours may not look exactly like mine, but you should be able to tell the difference between those 3 pieces. The dough hook is just going to be literally, it kind of looks like a corkscrew for most mixers. It looks like a corkscrew. Okay, so we've got 1 stick of butter, which is half a cup most of the time. Half a cup is what you're going for. So if you've got the smaller sticks, just make sure you've done your math right and you've got the right amount. We want half a cup of unsalted butter and a cup of granulated sugar. The sugar I have to admit, don't always square off because it falls a little bit easier into the cracks and crevices of the measuring cup. All right, so we've got sugar. Keep the sugar. We're going to need that for our whipped cream in a little bit. And then we are just going to always start your mixer on the lowest speed. You never know if your mixer, given the day I've had so far today would be the day that the mixer would decide to wig out. I'm now probably jinxing myself. But if you didn't start it on the lowest speed, you could get a real surprise. So we start on the lowest speed and then we work our way up. So we're on step 3 in the recipe here.
Amy, I have blown out the engine of my stand mixer twice. The first time it happened was because my brown sugar was way too hard. The second time it happened, I still don't know what went wrong, but I was making whipped cream.
Really?
Really?
And you blew out
took it to a small engine repair shop and got it fixed, and no one knew what really happened there, but
wow. The brown sugar, I can understand because they can get really hard. The whipping cream, that just sounds like a freak incident. It sounds like that day, the day I'm having today.
Well, knock on wood. The technical difficulties earlier were the end of it.
Exactly. All right, guys, so you can slowly raise your speed. I've got 10 levels of speed on my mixer, and we're looking for this to get, like it says in the recipe, we're looking for it to get light and fluffy, or it says light in color and fluffy. I'll show you what my bowl looks like in a second here. You will see the color will go, everybody's butter, each brand is a different color. Some are really dark golden, some are lighter. So just keep in mind, you're looking for a lighter shade than you started with, okay? So yours may still be darker than mine or lighter than mine, depending on the brand of butter you have. Well, let me show you what, you can see this. Right now I've got, instead of, you know, what was 3 little pats of butter and some cup of sugar that I threw in there, now I've got, you know, a light and fluffy mixture. I'm gonna probably mix it for another 30 seconds here. And be sure, guys, to have a spatula and hands because it is your best friend when you're making something in the stand mixer. Especially modern mixers have the bowls, if you've looked closely, have almost like a moat in the bottom of them. They have a divot that comes up in the center and then a moat around it. Ingredients, especially sugar and butter, love to get stuck in that moat. And you don't want loose sugar in this recipe, right? You want it to be forced to combine with the butter. So use your spatula. Most recipes will tell you to use a spatula around the sides of the bowl, but also use a spatula around the bottom of the bowl to make sure nothing is sticking to it, okay? So you can never, I've had students ask me, well, how many scrapes around the bowl and the bottom of the bowl is too many? There isn't such a thing, okay? If you think you're scraping too much, you're probably scraping just enough. There is definitely such a thing as not scraping enough and ending up with loose sugar or butter stuck on the bottom of the bowl, and that will definitely affect your recipe. What'll end up happening is when you pour the mixture, the batter for the cake into the pan, when it cooks, you're going to have, wherever that cluster landed, you're going to have a different texture. You're either going to have an air pocket where a big thing of butter melted out, or you're going to have a big ball of sugar, neither of which are desirable, right? So to get a consistent product across the whole cake, you want to use your spatula. So right now, as mine's getting even more fluffy, I have stuff stuck to the bottom. So I am also, use your spatula to get stuff off of your paddle in your the actual attachment, because things will stick on that too. And if you need to, sometimes you got stuff stuck underneath it, you got to just run it a little bit to get it off. Okay, so let me show you what it looks like now. Okay, so now I've got nice lighter color creamed, we call this officially creamed butter and sugar. We're gonna off this paddle. Okay, so that's step 3. We're gonna flip our recipe over and we're gonna move on to step 4. So let's talk about eggs. I like to tell people 2 things about eggs. First, have a separate bowl, a small bowl, to crack your eggs into, instead of crack them directly into your mixing bowl. The reason I tell people to do that is if you happen to get a rotten egg and you dump it right into the bowl, you've just ruined your butter and sugar, as opposed to just throwing out what's in this bowl. Also, if you get some eggshell, it's the same situation. It's much harder to dig out an eggshell from creamed butter and sugar than just a nice little bowl that you cracked your egg into. So it's a good habit to get into. The other thing I like to do is to tell people is crack your eggs on a flat surface, like your countertop. Here I've got a paper towel on my countertop. I honestly grew up being told to crack eggs on a corner of a bowl or, you know, on the edge of something. The reason I switched is, you've probably heard in the news that, you know, every now and then there can be bacteria or salmonella of some kind, you know, poisoning from eggs and various other things too. If you happen to have an egg with something bad on it, like salmonella, it's on the shell itself. Okay, so we don't want the shell to get into the egg. We want to limit that risk as much as possible. So if you crack it on a flat surface, just the physics of it, you lessen the chance of getting a shard of egg into the inside of the egg. If you do it on the side of a bowl, just given the angle that you're doing it at, it's more likely to push the shell into the inside of the egg. So hope that's a helpful tip. It's just, you know, it's a switch. It took me a little while because it was just not what I was used to doing, to crack an egg on a flat surface, but good habit to get into. All right, so we've got 5 eggs. And you'll see that the recipe says we're going to add these eggs one at a time while the mixer is running on a low speed, because we don't want to wallpaper our kitchen with flying eggs. On a low speed, we're going to add them one at a time. The reason we add them one at a time, and look, let me back up and say, if when you're dumping them in, 2 yolks happen to fall out of the bowl at the same time, it's not the end of the world. The life will go on and it'll be okay. But it's just a good habit to get into, to try to do 1 egg at a time. The reason for that, the way I like to explain it to people, is it's just easier for the ingredients to incorporate with each other when you don't dump them all in at once. I like to use the analogy that if you're throwing a party at your house and you invited 100 guests, if they all showed up at the same time, you'd be overwhelmed trying to find a place for everyone's coats and bags and whatever, you know, dishes they brought you and drinks. If they only showed up 10 at a time, it's much easier to deal with. So think of that when you add your eggs, that it's just easier to get the egg mixed in if you only add 1 at a time. Again, if 2 happen to drop in, or even 3 on accident, because I know sometimes yolks can, you know, they have minds of their own and you pour them in, it'll be fine. You just want to keep an eye to make sure that everything mixes together in the mixing bowl. And it's not like you have to count. It has to be 20 seconds in between each egg. Just watch, just give it a chance for that egg to break up, the yolk to get incorporated. You're obviously going to see that your batter is starting to turn darker yellow from the yolks of the eggs. And then after we're done with the eggs, we're going to add half a teaspoon of vanilla extract. How's everybody doing? Everybody doing all right? Thank you again, guys. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I haven't seen anything in the chat box, so I assume no news is good news.
Okay.
Jasmine says everything's going well. If you do find yourself in a bit of trouble, or if you have a question, please feel free to type it in the chat box and I will make sure to ask Amy. Emily says all going great.
Okay, good. I'm glad to hear that. And thank you again, guys, for bearing with me today in the late start. It's not my usual MO. It's just today, just off. Okay, so we've got half a teaspoon of vanilla. My hint for vanilla is if you pour it straight in while the mixer is running, at least for me, it always seems to fly everywhere. So I tend to pour it along the sides of the bowl and let it kind of drip in. And that always seems to help. Extracts in general, I find that happens. So that's just vanilla extract. All right, so we've got half a teaspoon of vanilla extract or vanilla bean paste. You can use them interchangeably, the amount. You can also use less vanilla bean paste if you want. It's arguably more concentrated. That's what you have. Okay, so we're going to mix until everything's combined. Then we're going to scrape. I know I can see on my paddle, I've still got some creamed butter and sugar that has not mixed in with the eggs that I'm going to scrape off. Because again, we do not want those clumps of butter and sugar because they will ruin the texture of your cake. So then we're going to scrape down the sides of the bowl. The nice thing about this recipe is, look, if you just want a yellow cake for the future, you can just use this cake, right? It doesn't even have to be Tres Leches, but I will show you how to turn it into a Tres Leches. The thing that I always found so interesting about Tres Leches is it clearly has a ton of dairy and fat in it, but it doesn't taste heavy. It was always amazing to me. And I think it's because ideally you're going to serve this cold And I think that it just becomes so refreshing. It's almost like a spongy ice cube because there's so much dairy in it that essentially is soaked up by the cake as a sponge, that it's so refreshing. And I think that's why you see this, especially in like Miami, and you know, closer to the equator. You seem to see Tres Leches Cake a lot more. Cuba. And I think it's just kind of funny that it's so heavy, but yet it's so light at the same time. So I hope you guys enjoy the final product. All right, so we scraped down the bottom, sides. I'm gonna give it another mix because I had quite a bit of butter and sugar that was still kind of hanging out on its own there. And now we're gonna move on to step 5. All right, so for step 5, we're gonna put our mixer on the lowest or second to lowest speed. And remember those dry ingredients we had from before, the flour and the baking powder. We're going to grab that. And instead of dumping all of this in at once, which, as you heard me talk about with eggs, it's the same situation. If you threw all this in at once, the mixture that's in there already will be like, whoa, way too much stuff at once. So we're going to add it a little bit at a time. In the recipe, I suggested about a 1/4 cup at a time. I've got a 1/2 cup measuring cup here, so I'm actually, you know, just going to scoop a little bit in. Low speed, again, because we don't want to wallpaper our kitchen. Just slowly tap it in. This is a perfect example of something that I think scares some people away from baking, which is patience. A lot of people, I don't have the patience to bake. This is a perfect example where it really does pay off to have a little patience and to put the dry ingredients in a little bit at a time, as opposed to just dumping it in. You will see a difference in the texture of your cake if you do it. If you have a little patience. I personally, that's one of the reasons why I got into baking. As a former lawyer and lobbyist, my life was filled with anxiety, and the kitchen was always a great source of relief for me. And I think when I first started, it was because obviously I had to eat. It was out of necessity, but then I just learned to love having that creative outlet and the patience that was required to do it. If you had told me that's why I was doing it, I would have been like, I'm not a very patient person, but I have learned patience through the kitchen. So for what it's worth, it's definitely worth putting a little bit extra time to get that final product just right. You will have a much lighter crumb, more spongy cake if you do it this way. All right, so we're gonna dump a little bit in at a time until we get all of this taken care of. You don't have to wait for your previous amount that you dumped in to be completely incorporated before you move on to the next cup. My suggestion is just don't dump it all in at the same time. All right, so we're on step 5. We're slowly adding this flour and baking powder mixture. And as you see in the recipe, my suggestion is, we're looking obviously for a homogeneous batter at the end. At the end, you want to make sure that you can't see any white from the dry ingredients. You're obviously going to see the texture of what's in the bowl change. And at the end, then I just, I've got this much left, not too much in there. And I'm just going to dump that in. Make sure you get everything out of the bowl. At this point, if you're anything like me, or what my mixer looks like right now, I've got kind of a film around the side of the bowl of some kind of unprocessed flour and baking powder that I dumped in. So you want to make sure that you mix that in. So handy dandy spatula. We're going to scrape the sides of the bowl. Also make sure to check the bottom. We don't want to see any white powder. Okay, we want all of this to be a nice kind of creamy colored batter. Also make sure you get, more than likely some of your dry ingredients accumulated on your paddle, often on the top when you're dumping it in. So just scrape that off. Should be a nice kind of silky, almost like a vanilla pudding texture for the cake mix. All right, and if for some reason you don't have your oven on 350, turn it on now. This is your last chance to preheat. All right, remember to scrape the bottom of the bowl. I actually forgot to do that a second ago. Just going back to do it. All right, and so that's it for a pretty, we put a lot of love and care into it, but it's not an overly complicated vanilla cake batter. Hopefully something that obviously takes more time than dumping a box of a cake mix. And there's a time and a place for box cake mix, I get it. But hopefully this isn't, so complicated and so much effort that you don't think maybe sometimes you would do this instead of a cake box. Usually all the ingredients for this cake is something that if you bake, you have in your pantry. Okay, so our final texture, we're looking for something like this. So it's flowing. It's obviously not thick like bread dough, but it's also not runny like a glass of milk. Okay, that's the inside of the bowl. No remaining obvious. I've got a couple little pieces of white on the side still over here. I'm going to scrape in, and you can also then fold it by hand. And if you've been doing this by hand, by the way, that you probably found that the hardest part is getting the sugar and the butter to combine. And that will be made much easier the softer your butter is when you start to try to cream it with the sugar. That, by the way, I can't remember if I mentioned that to you guys, that's the official term for combining granulated sugar or brown sugar for that matter, and butter. When you force those two together and you're making the sugar essentially bombards the butter and makes room for an air pocket for the sugar to combine, and it comes into one mixture. That's called creaming. So
Amy, we have a question.
Yes, go for it.
Ishita asks, if ours is on the thicker side, what should we do?
How thick is it? Is it thicker than mine?
Pause. Wait for a response.
Okay.
It does not drip.
Oh, it's not dripping at all. Interesting. Okay, are you sure you added 5 eggs? And the vanilla is probably not going to make a huge difference because it's only half a teaspoon, but it's enough to add some liquid. If it is, oh, go ahead.
She says yes, they did add 5 full eggs.
Okay. This is a good point because 5, and now make sure they were large eggs because that will make a difference. An egg is that unique ingredient that's sometimes considered a liquid, sometimes considered a solid, right? Okay, they were large. Good, this is a perfect point. I am guessing that you should just add 1 more egg. Sometimes, and I've had this happen, I buy the same brand of eggs every week and same size. And sometimes you'll just get a bunch that runs smaller or larger. Chickens just decide to do something different that week. So I would say add another egg. If it is on the verge of being runny, then maybe add some more vanilla. That's another option. It may not take a whole egg. So one other option is to crack 1 egg into a small bowl, mix it up like you're making scrambled eggs, and then just add a little bit at a time. So that's the way that you would add 1/4 of an egg or half of an egg, which is always a question I get from students. They're like, there's no such thing as half of an egg. How do I do that? So you would crack a whole egg, scramble it up with a fork or a small whisk, and then just add a little bit of time. That should fix it. I'm guessing that's the issue, is that your eggs just happen to run a little smaller this week. But you do want, yeah, you bet. You definitely want this to not be runny, but you want it to at least flow. Let's call it that. Let's use the word flowy. We want it to slowly, come off of a spatula like this. So if it's not doing that at all, then I would definitely add some more egg and maybe some more vanilla. Okay. Any other questions right now? Okay, so for those of you, I know Ishita is working on adding her extra eggs here, or vanilla. Those of you who have your batter ready, remember our greased and floured pan, we're just gonna pour it in, okay? And Ishita, like, you just let me know when, where you're at in the process. If you need me to repeat something, if you didn't catch it because you're working on getting your batter to be a little runnier, just let me know and I'll bring you back up to speed. Okay, so yeah, hopefully this is helpful. Hopefully you guys can see me pour this in here. This is, it's flowy, okay? Not like a pizza dough or a bread dough that's kind of a ball, but it's not runny, like I said, like, a glass of milk.
The egg trick works. They have achieved flowy batter.
Perfect, I love it. Awesome. Yeah, that's just a good kind of knowledge, hopefully, to have in general for other recipes too, is that the egg size, it's predictable and then it's in a range, if you get the same product every week, but you will see some discrepancies. So always good to just keep an eye on that. Okay, so for those of you who are filling your pan, I'm just using my spatula to evenly spread this out. You don't have to get out a straight edge and a ruler and make sure that it's perfectly even. But obviously we want this to bake evenly. So the more even you can get it, the more likely it is to bake evenly. And so we have a big hump in the center, which I did. It's going to take longer for that section to bake than the rest of the cake. So again, it doesn't need to be scientifically accurate, but just play around with it. Make sure you don't, especially the corners, as you spread it out, just make sure that you've got even amounts at the end. With that spray that you put on here in the butter, you may see that the batter actually kind of pulls away from the corners and you have to force it in there. Don't be shy doing that. It's okay. Okay. Got a little extra here. If you've cleaned, hopefully you cleaned your hands before we start all this. I should have mentioned it at the top of the class. Then it's okay to use your fingers here to get every little last bit in the pan. All right, so this is going to go into our 350-degree oven for a total of about 30 minutes. If you have, like I do, if you can see here, I've got a little bit that's over here that I kind of hit the pan. I'm going to use a damp towel to remove that, just because I don't want that to burn, which it will. And then that, could impart some smoky flavor into the cake that we're not looking for. So, it doesn't have to be perfect, but if you have a large blob like I did here, go ahead and just remove it. So 350, if you're using the 9x13 pan like I am, set your timer for half that amount, which is 15 minutes. And when you come back from setting your timer, I will explain why we're doing that. All right, so 350, timer for 15 minutes. If you're using, actually, let me just ask, is anybody using a different size pan than 9x13, just to give me a heads up on guiding you with baking time?
Jasmine is using a different sized pan. What size pan are you using, Jasmine, if you don't mind me asking? A 9-inch
my next question.
circular
pan. Okay, so 9 inches. So you might be roughly the same time. I would still set your timer for 15 minutes, Jasmine, and we'll go from there.
Oh, I'm sorry. Ashita was using a 9-inch circular pan. Jasmine says they're not sure what size their pan is, but it's a short rectangle.
Not a loaf pan, though. Is it like a loaf pan? Like you'd put like, a loaf pan. Okay, so you came up much higher in the pan than I did.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. All right. So if you're using a loaf pan, it's definitely going to take longer to bake this. Let me stop. And so go ahead and set your timer for 15 minutes, because you're definitely going to need at least 15 minutes. Let me explain why we're setting the timer for half the time and what we're going to look for at the end of this. And that will help all of you as you're trying to figure out if your cake is done or not. So I mentioned earlier at the beginning that when you set your oven to 350, the internal temperature of the oven in all locations of your oven may technically not be 350. So I got an inside thermometer that hangs at the front of the inside off one of my racks. just to kind of test this theory out. It was, I used to teach at Sur La Table in Old Town, and then that location closed after COVID, and actually due to a rent dispute with the landlord. It's a whole nother story. I'll spare you guys the details. But one of the things that we often were talking about with students at Sur La Table is we had professional convection ovens. So not a traditional conventional oven, which I have at home and all of you more than likely have. And we still had what's called hot spots and cool spots in your oven, which means that, for example, I have a customer who has told me, like, she loves to make I won't mention the brand, but the crescent rolls that come out of a can. Which, hey, those are delicious, especially at Thanksgiving. So no judgment there. But she was saying, I think I need a new oven because every time I bake these, I end up with like 2 or 3 that are burnt and the rest are just perfect. And I said, before you go to spend $1,000 or more on a new oven, try this. You likely have a hot spot where they're burning. So halfway through the time that's required to bake them, what I want you to do is rotate the pan. If it's on the top shelf, I want you to move it to the bottom shelf. If it's on the bottom shelf, move it to the top shelf and rotate 180 degrees, okay? And see if that helps. And lo and behold, she wrote me back and she's like, my gosh, like I have no burnt crescent rolls. I don't need a new oven. And I said, welcome to the club. Your oven is exactly like everybody else's oven. Everybody's oven has personality. Nobody's oven, even if we had the same brand, bought it 2 days apart from each other, you will have different hot spots and cool spots than I do. So a conventional oven, which is what most of us have, it fires, which it'll say, your oven will say, hey, my baker wants me to be at 350 degrees. I got to light myself, heat myself up. Whether you have gas or electric, it's got a heating element that's going to try to get to 350. And then you're counting on the door to be closed and the air to circulate evenly, which is a really tall feat, right? I mean, there's a lot of space in the inside of your oven to get every nook and cranny heated exactly the same. A convection oven adds an additional element. It adds a fan, often on the top, sometimes in the back, that, like your air conditioner, will run and in an attempt to circulate the air evenly. So to try to eliminate some of those hot spots and make sure that it is in fact 350 in all nooks and crannies of your oven. I can tell you from using a convection oven at Sur La Table, it's better at eliminating hot spots and cool spots, but it's not perfect. So no matter which kind you have, I still encourage you to rotate your pans when you're baking halfway through the allotted time. So when you do that, again, you're going to rotate. If you're on the top shelf, you move to the bottom shelf to the top, and 180 degrees front to back. The exception, two exceptions to this. If you are baking something, which most home bakers are not, but if you are baking something that is extremely sensitive to temperature, AKA something like a macaron, or the French macaron, not the coconut macaroon. Okay, so the French almond or nut-based flour sandwich cookies. I'm going like this because they're like, little cookies, or like a souffle that needs to rise. So anything that needs to rise, a macaron rises and makes those little feet. So we actually call that bottom part of the macaron, or a souffle, very temperature sensitive, or like a meringue. You're making like a pavlova or meringue cookies. All those are very sensitive to temperature, and opening the door really at all during the baking time is going to throw things off. So that's one time to not rotate. The other reason you wouldn't rotate is my experience has been, if you take more than 30 seconds to rotate your pans, remember you're leaving the door open that whole time, right? So all the hot air is coming out. When you go to close the door, the oven says, holy cow, I'm supposed to be at 350. I just dropped to 250. I have to reheat. And suddenly you've made a huge hot spot in the oven for it to reheat, which it negates the purpose of rotating the pans. So for example, my mom broke her wrist a couple years ago and she had a cast on. It made rotating her pans not impossible, but very slow. And it would have taken her more like a minute to rotate them. And I said, don't do it, because you will negate the purpose of rotating the pans. So if you can do it within about 30 seconds, you don't need to get out a timer, just count in your head. Most people can do it within 30 seconds. Then I personally say that the benefits to rotating your pans will far outweigh the fact that the oven door has been open for 20 to 30 seconds. That's why we're setting our timer for half the amount of time. At the end, what we're going to be looking for in this cake is it's going to be brown around the edges, well, not burnt brown, but caramelized, right? A nice lighter brown around the edges, no matter what kind of pan you have it in. And the real key to figuring out if any cake is done is to take a toothpick, although the toothpick may be tough in a loaf pan because it's going to be deeper than the toothpick. So if you have like a kebab skewer or a straw, like a metal straw, is to stick any of these devices or utensils in the middle of your cake, and then in a couple of other discrete places around the cake, and see if you get any crumb or batter sticking to it, okay? Some recipes will tell you that the toothpick or kebab skewer or whatever you're using doesn't need to be completely clean. Some crumbs are okay. What you don't want is it will be obvious if the cake is still raw or undercooked and you get a liquid, like actual batter sticking to your utensil, okay? So especially with the what am I trying to say? The bread pan, with the loaf pan, you are likely, I would guess, going to be baking it certainly for 30 minutes and probably closer to 40, maybe even 45. We'll see, depending on how high up your cake went, the batter. For the 9x13 pan, we're looking at about 30 minutes total. For the 9-inch round pan, I'm gonna guess it'll be still in the 30-minute arena, but we will reset our timer for 15 minutes. We'll set it again for 15, and then you will start checking with a toothpick or a kebab skewer, metal straw. Technically, you could probably, I wouldn't use a plastic straw because depending on how hot the cake is, it might melt it. We don't want that. But if you have a paper straw, something like that, obviously something that isn't going to put really obvious holes around the whole top of your cake. Although that said, guys, now that I'm thinking about it, ultimately we are going to be putting holes in our cake to drizzle our filling in. So in this instance, larger holes in your cake aren't the end of the world. Does anybody need help trying to figure out what to use for testing what we call like the clean toothpick test?
While I wait for people to answer that question, we do have a different question. Emily writes that her pan must be a little bigger than 9x13 because her cake is slim and feels done.
Oh, feels done already. Did I say that was Emily Van Scoy, by the way?
Yeah.
Emily and I went to grade school and high school together. Hi, lady. So it feels like it's done already with 15 minutes up.
Okay, apparently she baked it early. So she says that when she baked it before, it was done at 25 minutes.
Oh, that doesn't surprise me. Okay. Yeah. So, right. So here's mine. I am about 10 minutes in the oven and it's still flowing, right? Very clearly not done. I just wanted you guys to see that. Here, let me put it in front of this camera. This is 10 minutes. It's still liquid. In the center, especially, and I've got lots of bubbles. All right, I'm going to put this back in here. Yeah, that's a good point. If you have it didn't sound like anybody else was using a pan that might be thinner than mine, but that's an excellent point. If you have a pan that is running where your batter doesn't come up as high as it looked like mine did, so actually is even bigger than my pan, even if just by half an inch, which a 9x13 pan, sometimes they vary a little bit, as you've just hit on. Yeah, your lasagna pan, exactly. Then it will take less time to bake. So in that instance, probably better, always better. You can always add more time. You can't take it off, obviously. So if you have what you think is a larger pan than what I used, I would set your timer for 10 minutes and then another 10 minutes and then check every couple of minutes after that for cleanliness in the toothpick. You could also probably do like 12 and a half. That would get you to, well, that would be, 25 minutes total. So you could do, 11 and 11, something like that. So the rule of thumb is most of the time, guys, in baking recipes, you're going to see that there is a range of time I think I actually said 30 minutes because, you know, I knew exactly what size I was using. But if you see in a recipe, someone says, you know, bake for 25 to 30 minutes, I always set the timer for half of that, the beginning of the range, because you can always keep adding time and checking to make sure it's done, but you can't take it off if it's overdone, right? So to Emily's point, that does not surprise me that a slightly larger pan would take less time. And if you two are also in that boat, then so if you've already done 15 minutes, then instead of 15 minutes, the second half, set it for, you know, 8-10 minutes, something like that. And we'll check it with the clean toothpick test.
If somebody really loved this yellow cake recipe and decided later to go back and make cupcakes, how long would you put those in for?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's going to depend on how large your cupcakes are, right? Because there's the size that we probably grew up with as kids, and then there's the gigantic cupcakes that you see now. So I would say those are probably going to be, if you use a smaller size cupcake, you're looking at maybe 15 minutes, maybe. Larger size is going to take longer, like, you know, the jumbo muffin size. So again, the rule I want you to kind of walk away with is nothing is likely to cook in under 10 minutes, right? To bake in under 10 minutes. So you can set your timer for 6 minutes, 5 minutes, and then rotate and then do the clean toothpick test. You can always add more time, no matter what format you're putting this batter into. Does that help?
Yes.
I'm not giving you exact answers because what I want you to learn is the skill that you're looking for at the end and how to kind of run with it. Because the truth is, let's say you're on vacation and you have a craving for this vanilla cake and the Airbnb you're at only has cupcake pans. I don't want you to have to remember, well, Chef Amy said 6.5 minutes, or I just want you to remember, okay, I'm going to set it for 5 minutes, check, rotate, check, and use the clean toothpick test. That's the key takeaway.
And Emily asks, would you rotate a cupcake or a muffin as well?
Yes. Yep. Honestly, I rotate everything I put in the oven. Even at this point, I start rotating like my savory stuff. It's not even baked, like a pork loin or, you know, roasted veggies, because it's not that much, there's not a ton of difficulty to do it. And that way, you know, you're trying to get as even a bake as possible in anything you put in your oven. Yeah, great questions. All right, my timer is about to go off. When this is done, I will start walking you guys through the filling, which is not difficult. Essentially dump everything in a bowl and mix it together. So some of you may already have moved on to that step. Hannah, I'm forgetting her name. The woman who had added the extra egg or some more egg.
Ashita.
Yeah, okay. Ashita, how are you doing? Where are you at in the process?
She's also the one who's using the 9-inch circular pan. So, okay. and the egg trick did work. So right. Ashita, if you want to write in and let us know that you're on track, that'd be great.
I'm guessing it sounds like she's probably got something in the oven at this point. So
Ashita, did your timer go off? Yes,
my timer just went off.
Ashita's timer. So Ashita asked if she should take it out, and her timer did go off. So she's at 15 minutes. She's right where you are, Amy.
Okay. All right, cool. So, and she's got the 9-inch round pan. So Ashita, do me a favor, set your timer for 10 minutes. Or actually, you know what? Set it. Let's just do an experiment. Set it for 8 or 8.5. And then let's see where it's at when it comes out. I would bet money that it will still be not a clean toothpick at 8.5, and that you're probably going to go close to the full 15 minutes, but better to check ahead of time. So set it for about 8.5. Perfect. Thanks for letting me know that.
And Amy, you just rotated your pan. Your cake is already back in the oven, and you've set another. How long is your timer, Amy?
I did another 15 minutes.
Okay.
So 30 minutes total. Yeah.
Okay.
I can tell you guys that, I'm probably a little more up on my senses with baking than most people, but for a lot of recipes, you'll start to smell the whatever's baking in the last, 2/3 of the recipe of baking. I can actually smell that there's a vanilla cake at this point. So hopefully you guys can too. There's a point in the recipe where the aromas start emitting. And so it does smell about halfway through. I can definitely tell it's a vanilla cake that's baking in my kitchen. So keep an eye on that too. Your nose is a great tool in the kitchen. And as long as it smells like vanilla cake as opposed to burnt vanilla cake, you're doing great. All right, so are we good to move on to the filling?
We are good to move on.
All right, so I need everybody to grab a bowl. Remember, if you have a choice, if you have limited number of bowls, save your largest bowl for the whipped cream. So not now. Right now, we're going to make our filling. All right, and for those of you following along in the recipe, we are now on, well, I explained to you step 7, actually. So we're kind of in the middle of 6 and 7. 7 talks about the toothpick test. And now we're on number 8. So we've got our large bowl. I got to grab my oat milk. I'll be right back because I kept it in the fridge to make sure it stayed cold. So more than likely, especially since we started late, again, my fault. I apologize for that, guys. More than likely, you will be fully assembling this after our class ends. I'm happy to stay on. I don't know what Hannah's plans are though, so I want to be respectful of that. Ideally, you want the cake to cool before you put the filling in it, because otherwise the cake is not going to be as absorbent as it could be when it's cool, and you're going to end up with a whole bunch of the filling all over your kitchen floor, which is a mess to clean up. I say this from experience. But at the very least, I want to show you how to make the filling, how to make the whipped cream, and I'll walk you through how to assemble it. And I think we can accomplish all that in the next 30 minutes. Does anybody need to leave before 4? I think we had said it would be a 2-hour class, right, Hannah?
Yes, we planned for a 2-hour class. We started 15 minutes late. I have a hard cutoff time at 5, but I wasn't planning to stay until 5. So yeah, okay. We have some wiggle room is what I'm saying.
Okay. Guys, let Hannah know in the chat if you need to leave before 4 o'clock, or if this plan of attack works for you. In the next 30 minutes, I'll show you how to assemble it, or what we're going to have all the pieces. The assembly is not difficult. And I promise you it's okay. Someone has to leave by 4. Perfect. I will make sure I walk you through everything you need to know in the next 30 minutes. All right, so we are on number 8. I've got oat milk. Sounds like, I know someone said they had 2% milk. Whole milk is what's officially called for in the recipe. Coconut milk will work. So this is literally just, we're gonna dump all these things together. It's kind of relaxing, actually, just to throw it in. All right, so we've got 2 cups. If you are using oat milk, just one of the things that I've had some people tell me is slightly off-putting with oat milk is the color. It's kind of like a dirty water color. So adding these other milks to it will help with that. But the good news is this is a filling, so you won't necessarily notice it. But if the color bothers you, then you definitely don't have to use oat milk. And like I said, the recipe calls for whole milk, ideally. I just didn't happen to have any. Whole milk is one of those things that's challenging for me because as a baker, there are recipes that require it, but we don't use it personally. So I bake out of my home. So I don't often have whole milk. And you could actually, if you wanted, you could substitute heavy whipping cream here too. It will just be that much richer if you're using whipping cream. And quite frankly, whipping cream is much more expensive than buying the whole milk per ounce. So I don't want to make you spend any more money than you already have. So 2 cups of whatever milk you are choosing, with whole milk being the Cadillac of options. And then we've got that 14 ounce. We've got a 14 ounce can of sweetened condensed milk, which is essentially, it's been cooked down. That's why it's so thick and syrupy. So we're going to dump that right into the bowl. You will very likely have far more filling than you need. I'm going to give you a heads up on that. I wrote this recipe to err on the side of too much filling. I did that for 2 reasons. Some people like their Tres Leches cake more more runny than others, quite to be completely honest. And then the other thing is you can't really use half a can of sweetened condensed milk. I mean, you can, but then you need to know something else to do with it.
I have one suggestion. It makes
Yeah.
a great mixture for shaken cocktails that need a little bit of creamy base.
Very nice. That's excellent. And
Amy,
the other thing is actually like a Thai iced tea does great in a Thai iced tea too.
Emily asks, is there a suggestion for using the remaining filling? So not the remaining sweetened condensed milk like I was talking about, but the remaining filling.
Yes. So I would say I've had some customers tell me they put it on ice cream M. On top of, you could do French toast with it. Dip your French toast in it. So anything that you want to be kind of custardy. You could put it on ice cream, use it for French toast. You could put it on top of other baked goods. Oh, well, French toast. Yeah. So that's my suggestion. I mean, the other option would be to make another cake. You could use it on another cake. But I just figured it was easier to make sure that you had too much filling as opposed to not enough filling. So, and the other option, as Hannah said, is if you want to, in the future, cut down on the amount of sweetened condensed milk or evaporated milk and only use half of it or 2/3 of the can, then that you can use for mixed drinks and Thai iced tea and things like that. Just on average, I found that most of my customers are like, what am I going to do with half a can of this stuff? Please write your recipes so I use the whole thing. So that's what I did.
Rachel suggests snow cones.
Oh, that's a good idea too. Yeah, definitely. Yep. Or like a shave ice or like Hawaiian, especially like the Hawaiian version of snow cones has a lot of dairy-based drizzle on it. So yeah, that's a great idea. You could also, Emily, you could use it for creamer for your coffee. And again, anywhere you would use like the sweetened condensed milk or the evaporated milk, like Thai iced tea, you could use this as well. It'll just be a little sweeter. Okay, so we've got 2 cups of whole milk or whatever your milk, other milk option was, a 14-ounce can of sweetened condensed milk, 12-ounce can of evaporated milk in our bowl. So we're going to whisk together the sweetened condensed milk, the evaporated milk, and the whole milk. The thickest of these 3 is going to be the evaporated milk. Sometimes I found that, or actually the condensed milk. I think I'm confusing myself here. I found that depending on the brand, the textures change a little bit. Sometimes when I've made this, I've really had to whisk hard. It's actually much thicker. This time it's completely liquidy, and that's fine either way. But all the more reason to make sure that your cake cools as much as possible before putting this in. It's very possible, depending on how wet you want your cake, that you will only use half of this. But I have made it. I know my next door neighbor, actually, Tres Leches, is his absolute favorite. I tried to fit all of this in there. I usually have not been able to fit all of it in there without it starting to come out the sides. You will be helped by, all right, let me walk you through the, how we're going to put this together. When the cake comes out of the oven, how do I know? Oh, go ahead.
How do
you
you
want to
know
read that
how,
one, Hannah?
Yeah, how do I know how much liquid to put on the cake?
Yeah. Okay, before I answer that, just a second, because my nose is picking up a slight, oh, look at that. My timer shut off somehow. That could be why my, I know there was somebody else who set their timer for 15 minutes about the time of me. How much time do you have left? Because mine looks done.
No answer as of now.
No answer. Okay. So I'm sorry. I can't tell you guys.
Ashita says hers is done, and that was the round pan. Rachel says 30 seconds.
Okay. So I just started picking up, as I mentioned to you guys, with my nose. I was like, wait a second, something's changing. I suddenly have like more of a vanilla nutty aroma. Oh, 6 minutes left. Okay. And how's it looking? So I picked up that aroma, and that's why I want you guys to kind of learn to work with the toothpicks and your nose as opposed to just flat out timing. Good. Okay. With 6 minutes left, it's nicely brown.
No, so nicely brown was 30 seconds left. Anne, who
good.
had 6 minutes left, says lightly brown. Can you show us what your cake looks like on your kitchen cam, please?
Yep, I can. I will. I was just using a toothpick. I'll show you guys. So I'm sorry that I can't tell you exactly how long this was in there because somehow I cleared my second 15-minute timer. Here is my cake. I would say mine is dark. It's not burnt brown, but it's very nicely overly light brown. Probably the most important thing to pick up on is that the sides of the cake are very brown. And most importantly, I think a very telling thing is that they've pulled away from the size of the pan. Can you see that on the camera?
Yes.
Okay. So that is, to me, like if I just opened my door to the oven and saw this, I think I need to pull that out and see if it passes the toothpick test. So I am now putting my toothpick in, as you guys can see on the camera. And it's coming out, whoops, gotta get this. There we go. Completely clean. No crumbs, no liquid, nothing. So it's done, okay? So in this instance, which is actually, you know, I always found when I was teaching at Sur La Table that anytime there was a slight goof with technology, it was a perfect teaching experience because if it happens to me, it could very easily happen to you guys. I'm pretty sure I set my timer for 15 minutes the second time around. Somehow it shut off. Either I didn't hit start or I accidentally hit off halfway through. That's going to happen to you, right? Inevitably, or you're going to be cooking in somebody else's kitchen. You're not going to know how to use the timer. You can still bake without that. You got to use your nose. I immediately was like, whoa, okay, wait, I smell something. It's not quite vanilla anymore. It's like toasted vanilla. And when I opened and saw this, I was like, okay, I think I need to pull it out. So it's just, you know, something to keep in mind. I think we're so used to being, using technology to help us. We have to remember people were baking long before there were timers. So, okay, so that's what we're looking for. And let me know how yours are going in different shapes, guys. And now I'm gonna set this to the side.
And if it's not, if the toothpick test is not clean, put it in for another minute or 2 minutes. How long would you say?
I'd say no more than 2 minutes. A minute, minute and a half. Yeah.
And then check again.
You gotta kind of strike that sweet spot between not opening the oven door too often to check it, but also not overcooking it, right? So yeah, minute, minute and a half.
So I want to go back to Irma's question because
Yes.
Irma has to leave in 20 minutes.
Okay.
How do I know how much liquid to put on the cake once it cools?
Yeah, perfect. All right, so yeah, let's move on to how we're going to fill this cake. So let's just pretend this was done, or well, we know it's baked. We want it to cool completely. And when I say cool completely, I want no heat on when I touch it with my hand. Right now it's warm. And I also want to be able to touch the pan like without a pot holder. Okay, that's what I mean by let it cool completely. What we are ultimately going to be doing here, and I can show this, you can do this part even when it's warm. So this isn't a problem. We're going to use a fork, just a regular old table fork, and I'm going to poke holes all over the cake. Okay, so this is the first thing we're going to do. Now, the next step is just going to be dependent on what you bake this in and how you want to serve it. You've got two options. We're going to put these holes all throughout. You can't really do too many holes. What you can do is do way too many big holes that if, like, let's say you're using, I don't know, if you are using, like, if you have those claws that, salad claws or the claws that pull pork apart and they have much bigger radius on their tongs. If you do too many of those close to each other, you're essentially going to be digging gigantic holes. And we don't want holes that are so big that the filling is just going to sit in it, right? And not move into the rest of the cake. Because essentially what we're doing is we're making tunnels. Okay, we're creating tunnels that the filling is going to go into the holes, but then it's going to disperse through the rest of the cake. I saw a question just came up, Hannah.
Yeah, I was waiting until you got to the end of that thought.
Oh, okay,
Jasmine,
all right. Go ahead.
Jasmine asks, the milk I have is spoiled. Is there something else I can use?
Okay, so that's the 2 cups, but you've got the condensed and the evaporated.
Yes.
Okay, you can use more condensed and evaporated. You could use whipping cream. Let me see, what else could you use? Do you have any non-dairy milk? Like a box of almond milk, or a container of oat milk, or a can of coconut milk?
No.
Okay, so I would say, so what you have for sure is the can of sweetened condensed milk and the can of evaporated milk, and no other milk-like substance. I got to think off the top of my feet here. Is there anything else?
Could they forego the topping, the whipped topping, and use that whipping cream?
Yeah, do they have whipping cream for the whipped cream?
They don't know.
Okay, so if you have a container of whipping cream that we're going to make whipped cream out of in a second, more than likely you've got, if it's a new container, it's got more whipping cream in it than you're going to need to make the whipped cream. So you could use some of that to thin out your condensed and evaporated milk. Honestly, the other option is just not to use more milk at all and just roll with what you have for the filling. You will probably, I mean, you might have a little less. You could thin it out a little bit with some water, just a little bit, because it's not gonna, you don't want to use a lot. Actually, another thing you could use, do you have vanilla extract? Well, I don't want you to add 2 cups of vanilla extract, but you could add 1 or 2 tablespoons of vanilla extract to help thin it out. You could do that. And the reality is you will just have, you won't have any filling left over, which is fine. And you may have a slightly thicker filling than you would have with 2 cups whole milk.
But there are workarounds, it sounds like.
Oh yeah, there's definitely workarounds.
So you made the holes, and those are going to act as our tunnels. How do we know when we've poured too much?
Yes, okay, let's get back to that question. So you've got 2 options here. The first is you can take the cake out of the pan and put it on your serving platter, okay? That's one option. I personally have found, and if you're giving it as a gift to somebody or something like that, you're gonna need to take it out to be, to be able to give it to them. Because of the filling, it's personally, I find easier to fill it when it's in the pan. The problem is then you need to let it refrigerate that much longer after you fill it to try to have it set up, because if you try to take it out of the pan after you've filled it, everything will just fall out completely, okay? So you have 2 options. If you're just using this for you and your family, I would highly encourage you just to leave it in the pan because it's much less of a mess. But, and so that determines how you fill it and how you know it's too filled, okay? If I took this out of the pan right now, put it on a serving plate and started filling it, started pouring in my filling, the cake is hot, it doesn't have any walls around it, and I guarantee you about 2 cups into trying to fill this, it will start coming out the sides. So, and I know the cake can handle more than that. So the answer to your question is, in a perfect world, if you can manage it, let this cool, keep it in the pan, and then we are slowly going to, I'll show you, just, it's as simple as pouring it over the top. And letting it slowly sink in. That's what you're going to do. It's literally as simple as that.
So after you pour on the filling, and at what point do you know that you can't add any more filling?
So you will know, because no matter how much that when you, how do I explain this? You can see right now how it's kind of pooling in the corners here. Because I know this isn't filled yet, I can still kind of roll this around, and I know if I let this sit here long enough, it will soak in on the sides. You will know that you can't fit any more in the cake when it literally is sitting on the top like a pool, and it's just not going anywhere else. Okay.
Okay. And Irma asks, and Irma asks, so you mentioned leaving it in the fridge after you put on the liquid. How long do you leave it in the fridge for?
So I would say if you are trying to take it out of the pan, then I would leave it in there until it gets cold again. okay? Because remember, your filling right now is at room temp. You could also put the filling in the fridge right now while this cools. So I would say at least an hour. You can totally do it overnight. This cake is actually one of those that gets better as time goes on. It's like the perfect leftover cake. So, you know, we're talking like up to a few days, perfectly fine in the fridge.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank
So
you.
what the process from here is, we're going to let this cool. Then we're going to slowly put, and given all the dairy that's in the filling, if you think that this is going to take more than a couple hours to cool, given the temperature of your house, I'd put the filling in the fridge as well. Plus it gets it cool, which quite frankly is what you want all of this to be when you go to eat it. Most people do not eat Tres Leches cake like straight out of the oven. It's generally a cold, almost like popsicle like treat, right? So we're gonna let the cake cool. We're gonna pour as much filling as we can. And you have to be patient in between each of your pours of the filling, because it will take a little bit of time for it to soak in. So at the very end, when it's obvious that you can't fit any more in there, if you still have it in the pan, one of the advantages to that is you can literally take it over to your sink or garbage can and slowly pour off any excess when you've realized that it just can't take any more, okay? Then we're gonna frost it with whipped cream. And so let me show you how to make the whipped cream real quick. Is everybody okay on the filling?
Can we put the cake in the fridge to cool before we put in the filling?
Yes, absolutely. Not a problem with that at all. And this is also the perfect recipe, quite frankly, guys. If you need to make something ahead of time for whatever reason, for, you know, a potluck or for a family gathering or whatever, you can make the cake one day, make the filling the next day, and then assemble the whole thing on the third day, right? It's not going to go bad in between, and actually to have it cool off in between will work in your favor. It is unfortunately not a dish that you can make and serve at the same time. It will taste okay. It's just not gonna congeal the way you want it to. Okay, so let's set, I put my filling in the fridge. I don't actually have room in my fridge right now to put the cake in there, so I've just set it to the side. And let's real quick, before folks have to go, talk about whipping cream. If you have never made your own fresh whipped cream, and I don't mean fresh like you've gone out in the back and like milked the cows, but straight out of a container of whipping cream, it's one of those things that takes a store-bought treat to the next level. I have always told my students that if you don't have time to do anything else, make fresh whipped cream to go on the top, because it takes all of 2 minutes and it just elevates things to, you know, several levels up. And the nice thing is you can play around with the flavor of it too. So let me grab my whipping cream. And what I mean by playing around with the flavors is the way I wrote the recipe, it calls for vanilla extract. But let's say you wanted to make coffee flavored whipped cream. Well, you can add coffee extract, or you could add a little bit of espresso powder, or just a shot of espresso to it. You could do that too. If you want to make mint whipped cream, you can do that. If you want to make strawberry whipped cream, you can add some strawberry puree. Whatever you add, you just want to make sure that it's not, if it's extract, you're obviously only adding about, I think I said half, a teaspoon of vanilla. You don't want to add more than that in liquid. So if you're going to use strawberries, for example, you're going to want to squeeze out all the juice, because if you just add like a bag of frozen strawberries to your whipped cream, it's all going to deflate because it's just too much liquid. Okay, so you're going to want to minimize the liquid if you add it as a flavor for the whipped cream.
Irma would like to know if almond extract is okay to add.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, any kind of extract that's out there, if it's your cup of tea. So like, I think I have orange extract, lime extract, almond, raspberry is really good. I've done raspberry before, and then you can fold in some fresh raspberries. So that's what I'm saying about like fresh whipped cream. It just elevates things, and you can make it totally your own. And it takes hardly any effort, as you guys are about to see here. All right, so I've got heavy whipping cream. I always shake my whipping cream because sometimes it will separate a little bit. So give it a quick shake.
While you're shaking, Rachel would like to know, is cinnamon common in Tres Leches? Somewhat seems like I've had it with cinnamon somewhere before.
Excellent question. Yes, that kind of like the how liquidy do you like your Tres Leches is also up for debate. Cinnamon and nutmeg also. I've definitely seen it that way. Like I mentioned that my next door neighbor loves Tres Leches. He never likes it with cinnamon and nutmeg on it. And so I learned this, that there's actually kind of two schools of thought. If you wanted to include cinnamon and nutmeg, you've got a couple of different ways to do it. The easiest would be to add it to the whipped cream. And we can do that. Or you can actually just, even easier, we'll ice the cake with the whipped cream on the top and then just use like a small sieve or just your hands, if you can, to sprinkle cinnamon and nutmeg on the top. I don't know that I've ever had it where the cinnamon and nutmeg is in the cake itself, because sometimes that can be overpowering in the flavor of the cake. I have had it where it's also in the filling. So you could easily add, half a teaspoon, however, very personal choice on how cinnamony and how nutmeggy you want something. Add it to your filling, stir it up with the evaporated milk, sweetened condensed milk, and other milk, and you can get the flavor that way too, or a combo of all of the above. Great question. Okay, so we've got 1.5 cups of heavy whipping cream. And again, I'm using the biggest bowl that I had available just because I've learned the hard way that to have it splatter all over my kitchen, it's just one more thing to clean up. So the higher sides definitely help things. And then we need some granulated sugar and whatever extract or addition you want to use for flavoring it. And this is one of those things, if you decide this is too much whipped cream for you, obviously you can adjust accordingly, or if you want even more whipped cream, you can do that too. But unlike the filling, this should not be, more than likely you won't have any left here, because everybody likes whipped cream. And you can layer it on, thick. Even if you use like the loaf pan, you'll just have an extra thick layer of whipped cream. There's nothing wrong with that. So, all right. So we are on step number 9, guys. So I've got teaspoon.
Can you repeat the amount of sugar?
Yes, it is. I thought it was, 1 cup. 1 cup of sugar. Actually, you know what? So I wrote the recipe for 1 cup, but I suggest, and I know how I like it, so that's why I just dumped the whole cup, going to dump the whole cup in there. But you'll see in the recipe on step number 9, I actually say to start with 3/4 of a cup of sugar, because some people don't like the whipped cream quite as sweet as other people do. So have a cup ready, but you may only use 3/4 of a cup. How's that for a slightly elaborate answer? All right, so we've got our whipping cream, teaspoon of, in my case, vanilla extract, but if you've got almond extract, that'll be fantastic, whatever else you have handy. And then we are gonna do, I gotta grab a different mixing or a measuring cup. Sorry guys, I'll be right back. So I'll do the 3/4 cup just so you guys can see. Now, if you're somebody who doesn't like sweetness in your whipped cream, and I know there are those people out there, you don't have to add the sugar. I would add probably a tablespoon. Start with a tablespoon just because the chemistry works better when there's the granules to kind of poke holes in the fat of the whipping cream. That's the best explanation I can give you as to why it starts to whip up and increase in volume, is that the sugar is starting to puncture holes into the fat molecules of the whipping cream. I gotta grab my mixer. Again, remember I said you can do this on your stand mixer, but just make sure that you've got a setup where your whisk is reaching the bottom of the bowl. Which if you have a larger professional series mixer like I do, that doesn't generally work. So I use the hand mixer. You can also do this by hand. I've had people in my classes do that. Just take some good, you can use a whisk and you're gonna do some really good arm exercises. All right, so like I mentioned with the other stand mixer, start on a low speed just to kind of get everything combined. So we've got our whipping cream, 3/4 cup sugar, just as you prefer, and some flavoring, teaspoon of vanilla in my case. I'm going to slowly increase this. You're going to start seeing bubbles form. And then the real magic is going to happen on the highest speed. That's why I was saying the higher side of bowl you have, the better, because the higher speed keeps everything up. And this is not the time to not pay attention, because this will come together very quickly. You'll be looking at it. If you've never done this before, you'll be like, this doesn't look like it's going to come together. And then some, it's like quick, like it's like a magic trick. While I'm doing this, let me just reiterate something I mentioned at the beginning of class. While it's okay for the filling to substitute the whole milk for skim milk, if that's what you've got, or 2%, for whipped cream, that will not work. And the reason for that is simple chemistry. So the fat, the milk batter, I'll finish my thought, then I'll take the question, Hannah. So with whipped cream, the reason it whips is because, like I mentioned, the whisks themselves are forcing air into the liquid. The sugar is puncturing holes into the fat of the whipped cream, and everything is expanding. That's how you end up with this whipped cloud-like texture. If you use a milk that does not have a lot of fat, like skim milk, or a milk substitute like almond milk, you will be standing here forever trying to get it to whisk up, and you will never really have much success because there's just not enough fat to interact with the air. Is the bottom line.
Let me stop you for a second, Amy. It is pretty hard to hear you over your mixer, so I just want to repeat what you said. So what Amy is saying, is that you could stand there all day and do this to skim milk or non-fat milk or regular milk or nut milk, and it'll never whip up. You need to be using a high fat content whipping cream.
Yes, I think I just saw a comment. Believe it or not, the kitchen cam is muted. That's how loud my mixer is, I guess, that you can hear it through my AirPods. Yeah, Hannah got it exactly right. So if you are lactose intolerant, there are substitutes that will give you a good whipped cream. They just need to be high fat content. So coconut milk and oat milk are your best options. Julianne, thank you. Thank you for joining us.
And real quick, I want to say, if you have to leave early, I am recording this. We are going to put it on the library YouTube page for about a month or so before we take it down, or however long Amy lets us keep it up. So if you have to leave and you want to catch the end, should be up in a few days.
Yeah, and I'll add to that too, Hannah, that I'm not sure if my email address is on the landing page for the class, but I know my website is frompoliticstopastry.com. From there, you can email me. I am more than happy to help you guys. You know, if you're assembling this tomorrow and you have some issues, feel free to email me. Oh, thank you, Hannah. She just put my email on there. Yeah, feel free to reach out, guys. I'm more than happy. I'm also happy to see pictures of your final product. It always makes me happy to know that it worked out. But if it doesn't work out for some reason, I'm more than happy to walk you through the steps to get it to be right. Okay, so let me just mention, if you don't have whipping cream, whole milk could potentially work. Buttermilk could work, but it's going to taste very sour. Oat milk and coconut milk are your two best other options, with the warning that coconut milk, while it will whip up perfectly, will taste like coconut, which, you know, if you like coconut, that's not a problem. But if you don't want your dish to taste like coconut, then try oat milk. Okay. So, and if you are a coffee drinker or a latte drinker, you've probably experienced this at the coffee houses. If you're used to having a latte with a lot of foam from whole milk, and then you get one with skim milk, it's not the same. And that's exactly why, because you can get a little bit of bubbles from almond milk or skim milk, but you can't fully get that creamy whipped cream texture. So I just wanted to mention that's a little bit of science there. All right, tell me if there's any more questions. I'm gonna keep whipping. The sound's gonna go back up here. I'm almost done. I can hear you, Hannah. Sorry if everybody else is hearing.
Oh no, I muted myself while I was typing so you wouldn't hear my click, click, click of the keyboard. So to those of you leaving early, that's completely fine. We completely understand. We did get started about 15 minutes late today, thanks to the phone stand that decided that it wanted to implode in Amy's hand. But to those of you sticking around, I'm flexible with our end time, so we'll keep going until Amy's done. Jasmine has a question. The batter got thicker, but it turned to butter since it wasn't whipping. Can I turn it into buttercream?
Okay, wait, what happened? It turned into butter?
The batter got thicker, but it turned to butter since it wasn't whipping. Can I turn it into buttercream?
The batter for the whipped cream or for the cake? I'm guessing the whipped cream.
I'm guessing the whipped cream too.
Yes. For the whipped cream. You could actually, yeah, you could add some powdered sugar and a little bit of vanilla and maybe a splash of milk and turn it into some American buttercream frosting. You must have continued to be whipping while I turned things off so people could hear me. It is possible to over whip the cream, and I'm sorry I didn't get to that yet, guys. I was waiting to show you what mine looked like. Yes, let me stop. Everybody stop your mixers. You can, yes, there's just a small difference between what we call stiff peaks, which is as whisked as you want to get it, and I'll demonstrate that to you in a second here, and making butter. And so it sounds like some of you may have experienced that already. The good news is homemade butter is very tasty, so you can use what you've got. So essentially whipped cream, once it gets whipped past whipped cream, turns into butter and buttermilk. Okay, you cannot, unfortunately, you cannot go back by adding more whipped cream, adding more whipping cream to that mixture and whipping it. It's not going to revert back to whipped cream. So you will either need to start over for whipped cream, or as one of our students has suggested, you can take the butter that you've made and add a little bit of milk and some powdered sugar and maybe some vanilla extract and treat it just like you were using butter from the store and make American buttercream. It will make your final product a little heavier than the whipped cream on the top of the cake, but that way we won't waste ingredients. If you are still whipping your whipping cream, it's too many whips in one sentence. I've probably been whipping for maybe a minute and a half here. And can you see, this is what we call soft peaks. Can you see at the top, it's kind of flopping over? That's a soft peak. Some people like their whipped cream that way. It still is holding, like it's not completely dripping like a liquid, but it's not a complete whipped cream, right? So but when it gets to this point, you've got maybe 30 seconds before it's done. I was in the midst of, I think, telling you guys that when it was obvious that my sound is too loud. So I'll be quiet again here. I'll count to myself for about 15 seconds. Okay. And now, well, I still got soft peaks. Just a second.
So it sounds like if you've gone past the whipped cream stage and you're in the butter stage, the only real way to fix that is to turn it into buttercream frosting.
Yeah, or enjoy your fresh butter, add some salt to it. Okay, can you see now the peaks? Hopefully you guys could see this. They're not sticking straight up, but they're not flopping down. So this is now what we call like a middle peak. So not a soft peak, but a medium peak. And this is fine for whipped cream too. And then if I go maybe another 15 seconds. I will end up with, yeah, there we go. Stiff peaks. Can you see that it's just pointing straight up here?
Yes.
I don't know how well that's coming across camera.
Okay. Ashita asked, can you please repeat how to turn our freshly made butter into frosting?
Yes. Okay, so American buttercream is what you're going to be going for, not like a fancy Swiss or Italian buttercream, because that's a whole nother process. But American buttercream is butter, powdered sugar, a splash of milk, generally of some kind of liquid, and usually some extract, generally vanilla extract. You can use almond extract, any other kind of extract. So we're going to take the butter that you made. First, you remove the liquid that's in the bowl. If you have more milk, if you don't have a splash of milk to add, then just leave the liquid that's in the bowl with your butter, because that's buttermilk, and we'll use that. And then you're going to keep it on your, I don't have powder milk either.
So you need, don't have sugar, don't have powdered sugar either.
Oh,
okay.
Okay. Right. So American buttercream is really only going to work with powdered sugar.
You could put it in the fridge and run to the store.
Yes, you could. And I'm sorry, I know that's an additional step you weren't expecting. The good news is that the product you made by over whipping the whipped cream is butter you can use for your cooking, your baking, on your bread. And then buttermilk. There's probably not a lot of liquid, but you can just pour that off. But yes, I would suggest, if you want to make American buttercream, two options: either get some powdered sugar or start again if you have more whipping cream. Because you don't need a ton of whipped cream here. If you have like the rest of the container to use, that would be perfectly fine. I'm gonna step off camera here real quick. Okay. Does that help? Apologies that I didn't tell you guys sooner, that I didn't think you were far enough into whipping your cream that you would over whip it.
Ashita, are you pretty set with the recipe for turning your butter into frosting? We're still working on it. That's completely fine. Okay. I just want to make sure you understood how to do it while we had everyone here together. Yep.
No, it's a great question. And it's happened to many of my students at Sur La Table especially before. It's very easy to over whip it. So I think the key is, if you whip it again, what you're looking for, that's why I was saying that it looks like it's not going to whip. It's just like a liquid, and then suddenly it becomes more solid. It happens pretty quickly. You will start seeing the patterns of the whisk, whether from a handheld mixer or that you're holding yourself, the actual whisk, if you're doing it by hand. You will see that at first the patterns of the whisk don't hold in the whipping cream and the sugar and the vanilla extract, because it's just too liquidy. It doesn't have enough solid to hold the shape. But as you get close to the finish line, you will see that the whisk, the shape of the whisk, starts to make a pattern because things are getting more solidified. That's when you really need to pay attention, because you're like this close to over whipping. So I apologize that I didn't get that out soon enough to help a couple of you, but for the future, that's what you're looking for. For this amount of whipping cream, it shouldn't take you more than a minute and a half, maybe 2 minutes max, depending on what speed you're on your mixer to make the whipping cream. Okay, so while some of you are working on the whipping cream, let me just clean up a little mess I've got here, and I will show you what we're going to do to finish off the cake. Now, my cake is obviously not cold yet, but I want to just show you in a small patch of the cake how this is going to work. It's like I said, that you've done the hard work at this point. The assembling it is actually not difficult. All right, so we've got in the countertop camera, let me move this back a little bit. So ultimately this will be cooled. By the way, can you see that little bit of filling that I poured into it before is pretty much disappeared? Yes. Right. So that's what's going to continue to happen, one spoonful at a time, until it's like Old Faithful and you can't get anything to go down the holes anymore, and things will come up. It'll start bubbling up when you pour it in, or appear to bubble up. So once we get all of our filling in here, we are then literally just going to take our whipped cream. I'm just going to do this in a little spot here. We're just going to take our whipped cream and dump it over the whole top of the cake and spread it out. If you want to make, you know, peaks with it, you can get fancy on the decor, but we're really just icing the cake with the whipped cream. Then if you want to sprinkle cinnamon and nutmeg, as was discussed earlier, or even some vanilla powder, you can get fancy, you know, however you want to do it. On the top, you can. And that's it, guys. And like I said, it will last in the fridge for several days. And it's one of those wonderful recipes that, at least according to my husband, and I do agree with him on this, it gets better as it sits because it's essentially marinating.
Jasmine asks, can I use fake sugar? Jasmine, are you referring to the frosting? Because I know you're one of the people who had issues with the buttercream, with the whipping cream, the sweet.
Is she talking about like to make American buttercream or to make whipped cream?
Which part of the recipe do you want to? Okay, American buttercream.
Can she use fake sugar? So is it like Splenda? Like that kind, like that texture? Like yes. It's a fake granulated sugar. Personally, Jasmine, I wouldn't, but I don't do a lot with fake sugar. It's just that I know that the Splenda is meant to be a substitute for granulated sugar as opposed to powdered sugar. And we're really looking for that powder texture will dissolve into the butter better than the granulated sugar will. You can use it and it will probably taste okay. It's just that you're going to get a mouthfeel of granules because they aren't going to dissolve in the butter because we're not heating it up. So that's, I hope that helps. In theory, you can use it. It's not like you can't eat it. It's just not going to be the smooth mouthfeel that you would normally get from an American buttercream.
Okay.
So I'm assuming, Jasmine, you don't have any whipped cream left. You don't have any whipping cream left.
No.
Okay. Do you have any other high fat milk option, like a whole milk, a can of coconut milk?
No, I don't think so.
Okay. Okay.
No. I mean, so I'll say, it sounds like, and I know this is probably not the answer you want to hear, Jasmine, but from what Amy is saying, the cake, it's best to do all of this when the cake is completely cool, and the cake will only get better with age. So you could cool the cake tonight, fill it with the filling and let it sit overnight and really just get that great flavor from sitting overnight with that filling. And then tomorrow when you're out, stop by the store and grab some more whipping cream.
That's personally what I would do, because the cake is in no hurry. It will probably be even better tomorrow. And even if you didn't, I mean, I hate to say this, but even if you didn't want to mess with making the whipped cream from scratch, you could get a container of Cool Whip or a can of whipped cream if that's easier and put that on the top tomorrow. You can also, quite frankly, guys, some people don't put the whipped cream on the top. Some people just eat it straight up with just the filling and the cake. I like that, like I was saying earlier, the fourth leche. I like that fourth topping. Also, I mean, as beautiful of a cake as this is in color, it's a plain yellow cake, right? It doesn't have any frosting on it. So it will taste delicious, but I just think it looks like it's gone to the next level with a topping of some kind on it. And I like the lightness of a cold whipped cream on this otherwise heavy cake. So you got options. That's the good news. And time is not officially of the essence unless you were planning on serving it for dessert tonight. And then I would say, I personally would say just fill it, put it, if you're planning on serving it for dinner tonight, fill it, cool the cake, fill it, put it back in the fridge until you're ready to eat for dinner. And you'll still think it's delicious without the whipped cream on the top. Because there's no shortage of dairy. You still got three other Tres Leches in the mix. How's everybody else doing? Do we still have other folks with us?
We still have 11 people with us. If anyone
Good.
has any questions or wants to share how it's worked out for them, feel free to do so in the chat box or the Q&A box. Amy, do you want to take this moment to talk a little bit about where people can find you and what other classes you run and what they can purchase from you from your weekly menu?
That would be awesome. Yeah, thanks. So I'm here in Alexandria, Virginia. I'm assuming most of you guys are local since you found out about this through the library. I have usually a weekly menu. Sometimes it's a bi-weekly or monthly menu, and sometimes I don't have a menu. So the best bet is to check out my website, frompoliticstopastry.com. It will tell you what this week's menu is. I always am open for custom orders. If you go to the pastry tab on my website, you'll see all the different offerings I have. I specialize in Italian cookies, but then obviously there are other things like Tres Leches, scones, various other options on the list. So, and then I teach virtual classes, and I have a calendar. If you go to the website and literally look under classes, there's a classes tab. I actually just in the last couple of weeks populated classes through January. So there's actually even a couple additional outliers for things like National Dog Day, because I do dog biscuit classes. There's a couple of other outliers for later in 2022. I can't believe we're going to be in 2022. The classes are all virtual as of right now. Hopefully at some point, we will, I don't know if the pandemic will be over or if we'll just have learned to, work with it. You guys know how complicated that is. But for right now, everything is virtual with classes. Also do private virtual parties and corporate events. So, and all that information is on my website. And once upon a time, I was at farmers markets, but the local farmers markets in Alexandria, but the pandemic put a halt to that because we are an immunocompromised household, unfortunately. So like Hannah said, though, I do have usually a weekly menu for pickup on my front porch, and that's been working out really well. So I think that's it. So from politics-to-pastry.com. I'm also on Instagram, and not surprisingly at From Politics to Pastry, and on Facebook, not surprisingly at From Politics to Pastry. We have a weekly newsletter if you want to sign up for that too. That's probably far more information than you guys wanted.
We have some feedback from people. Rachel writes, looks great over here. Whipped topping with a fresh vanilla bean and a good dash of cinnamon. Super pretty with those flecks. And Emily writes, waiting for my cake to completely cool, but feel confident I can finish based on what you've told us.
Oh, good. Okay. Thanks, Emma. I appreciate that. Yeah. Any other questions, guys, on what you need to still, what steps you still have left to do? Anything else I can answer?
While you all take a moment to write out any final questions you have for Amy about anything you need before we end for the day, I just want to take a moment to plug a couple of upcoming programs. I'm really excited for Halloween. I'm a big spooky person, for those of you who know me. So I have a couple Halloween programs for adults this year. Tomorrow, 2 local psychic mediums are going to come for seance stories where they will share their favorite stories from working in the field. Skeptics welcome, because I'm certainly one of them and I'm going to be there. Also Wednesday the 13th, I have a PhD in early modern European history coming to lecture on magic use in early modern European history. Magic may not be real, but that doesn't mean people didn't used to practice it. And he's going to talk about a real book that is still housed in the British Library called The Excellent Book of Magic. And so those are just a couple Halloween programs for adults I thought I'd put on this year, and I'd love to have you all there. We did get some more things in the chat box for you, Amy, while I was talking. Kristen said thank you. Jasmine said, I used regular sugar and it tasted very good. So I'm glad, Jasmine, that you were able to work out your buttercream problems.
Oh, good. Okay.
Irma writes, thank you. I can't wait to taste the cake. It's my husband's birthday today, so we will have it later today. The cake is in the fridge, cooling down now. Ashita says, thank you for all your help. Our Tres Leches cake looks amazing. And yeah, so I'm so happy, Jasmine, that your buttercream frosting came out well with the regular sugar.
Yeah, that's awesome. Just in time for your husband's birthday. Yeah, and Hannah, you guys always have the best. Well, I'll exclude myself. I don't want to make it sound like I'm one of the best classes you have, but you always have the best classes. The list that you just gave for Halloween, you always have the most interesting stuff. And I guess then I'll put myself into that category. I hope you guys have enjoyed this. And thank you for having me, Hannah. I always appreciate it. And especially today, guys, again, apologies for the late start, but thanks for hanging in there with me.
All right. Thank you, everyone. And I'm gonna stop the recording, but I'm not gonna stop the webinar until I know we're all set. So thank you, everyone, for joining us on Sunday. Thank you so much, Amy, for your time and persevering through those technology gremlins that haunted us at the top of the hour. But all right. Thank you all and have a great day.